I really liked the way it used a pretty conventional storytelling structure to unpack a lot of tropes about uh, politics and romantic comedies and sort of small town mentalities. And I felt like everywhere you turned, he was sort of indicting the audience a little bit for assuming things would happen. Like audience assumptions do a lot of work in this movie. And I just thought it was a really funny, smart way of telling the story. Diana is the daughter of Jack Hastings, which is the small town colonel that Gary, played by Steve Carell, has come to sort of encourage to be the next Democratic candidate for mayor in this very small town that's always had the exact same Republican, I guess, but like just a singular candidate for mayor. And she's just sort of watching her father and her town get overtaken by the ambitions of these people that have nothing to do with her town and really no enduring interest in the town. They're just sort of using it as a symbol for some greater race that they're trying to master. This movie's really clever in the way that it shows how politics are so much about storytelling, which is an idea that I think we all sort of intuitively know, but maybe not the intricacies of it, and seeing how they position an enemy and a hero and what makes a person a hero and what they think the American public needs in this particular hero. I mean, it's really a reductive system, the way that they understand the electorate. And I guess out of necessity, because it's like a mathematical system, so they just create these boxes for people, but it's a very sort of dehumanizing form of storytelling. I think it's relevant now because in the last 10 years, but particularly in the last 3 years, the general population has become so much more invested in politics. And I think we've bought into it as a like, carnivalesque sort of storytelling narrative that we're all caught up in. I certainly, growing up, don't remember my parents being involved in politics in the way that it dominates every conversation in our life now. So it feels like a really good opportunity this period in time to discuss the like internal machinations of a campaign and who gets demonized and who gets valorized. The movie begins with this Democratic operative, Steve Carell, who comes to this very small town in Wisconsin to convince this man to run for mayor. Steve Carell, he's such a sort of universally beloved actor, and people feel a really particular thing towards him and such a warmth because he's so genuine and so lovely to watch. And seeing him play this kind of like cynical, underhanded guy is such a treat to exploit all of the goodwill that he's built up in his career. Byrne is such an amazing actress and such a funny comedian, and the part she's playing, Faith, is it just is one of the great female parts. I think it's so funny and so wonderful, and what she does with it is hilarious. And Chris Cooper is this lovely salt of the earth man who's playing a salt of the earth man, and he's just found so many moments of comedy and sort of absurdity in this whole circumstance that's coming to this very small town. Jon Stewart is one of the loveliest people I've ever worked with. He has such an attention to performance, which is remarkably rare in directors, for them not to just be paying attention to the frame and the lighting and creating a beautiful image, but he is like hypersensitive to every single beat of performance, which makes the process of making the movie, not just the finished product, but like the day-to-day life on set, so engaged and active, and you feel so sort of challenged, and it really creates such a nice environment having somebody who's paying such close attention to what you're doing and giving you new ideas every single take. It's really so fun. The whole movie's about how, especially in swing states, these political events and parties come into these small towns and make huge sweeping promises and really need these people to believe in the story that they're selling, and then they move on and never think about the swing state until they're back for the next election cycle, which is bad.
In terms of the script itself, I thought, here's a, ostensibly a political comedy, but it's really not so much about the politics themselves in my mind. It's about the human beings that get caught in the middle. And I think in that way, it's a really universal kind of movie that it doesn't necessarily lean right or left. It's really mostly about the people who are caught in between. Jon Stewart is obviously a political animal. He knows so much, and he's so well versed and smart, and understands so much of the minutia concerning politics. So I think having something like this in his hands is really important. To have somebody with that background and that kind of knowledge is obviously is helpful when you get to the comedy, because he understands it on a much deeper level than I think a lot of people do. Well, first and foremost, I think it's really funny. I think it's full of eccentric, kind of strange characters that you might not see every day. But I guess the underlying theme of it is very humanistic, and I think will appeal to a lot of people because of that. I play Gary Zimmer. He is a Democratic political strategist. He lives in DC. And one day he sees this viral video is brought to his attention that depicts this farmer out in the middle of nowhere in Wisconsin who stands up in this town meeting and expresses himself very eloquently and beautifully, and seems to really stand for so many of the values that, the party is looking for. So my character decides to travel to Wisconsin and convince this farmer, this really apolitical man, to run for the mayor of the town. And that's what sets everything in motion. He's very smart. He's very driven. He's incredibly opinionated. He doesn't have a weak self-esteem. He's kind of narcissistic, and at the same time, he does care about people, and he cares about what he's doing. He cares about, he cares about doing the right thing, or as he sees it, doing the right thing, almost at all costs. We're actually shooting in this really tiny town. So we have the sense of we're not on a back lot anywhere. We're in a real town, and these are real buildings, and the people that we're talking to in this town are real people. A lot of the extras and some of the principal characters are from around here. So we're getting a sense of what this town is like, and it's not unlike the town that's being depicted in the film. I was terrified of Chris Cooper before I met him, because I thought this is someone who would just kill you with a death stare. He's so intense, or at least that's, you see him in films and that's the sense you get from him. Like, do I look at him in the eye? I mean, that's the kind of person I was worried he would be, because he's such a good actor, and he's so riveting, and he does a lot without doing much at all. He's incredibly calibrated and intuitive. But then you meet him, and there's obviously, like happens so often, he's the nicest guy, and really warm and sweet, and cares deeply about what he's doing. He's a retired colonel in the Marine Corps. He's real honest, disciplined, and he's a man of great character. And I think that just kind of comes through who Chris Cooper is. He feels like he's that same sort of person, at his base. He's just a good, solid human being. Mackenzie Davis plays Diana, who is the colonel's daughter. And she is, she's this young, incredibly smart, opinionated, and a sort of a foil for my character when I get to town, because I think my character has this idea that the small town folk aren't going to quite get all of the snazzy things that he does. And she gets it, and she is way ahead of him in a lot of senses. Topher Grace plays Kurt, who is one of Gary's pollsters, essentially. He's one of his right-hand men or women, and he's playing it like he's the kind of guy that talks down to everybody below him, but cowers under everyone above him. So he's that middle management guy that really feels his authority when given the opportunity. And he's great. He's really fun, and he's a really good improviser too. Every member of the crew that I've talked to has mentioned what an anomaly he is as a director. He makes everybody, apart from all the creative stuff, just as a human being, he makes everybody feel welcome and a part of what they're doing, and like an equal partner. And it's not just lip service. He's really kind to people, and he really offers himself up. He talks to everybody. He includes everybody in on whatever process is going on. And I think people appreciate that. When you feel like you're a part of the creation of something, and an equal partner, I think that's important. This is what I like about how Jon wrote this. And obviously, Jon leans liberal. I don't think that's any surprise to anybody. But the way he wrote this film, it doesn't feel like a partisan movie to me. It feels very even-handed. Like there are pluses and minuses on both sides of what's going on politically in this film. And a lot of the minuses, a lot of the political garbage that people don't necessarily see or want to see.
One of the things he explained to me about Tina, my character, is that she's in analytics, and that Topher's character is in polls. And in some ways that represents, Tina represents sort of the future of how they kind of run these campaigns, and sort of treats Topher like he's in the past. America in general right now is suffering from sort of a deeper disease. And so I think that the film is ultimately highlighting that, our whole sort of system of how we do things is essentially dead and corrupt, that there's so many sort of circuitous ways through things that are no longer really about the people or the politicians running, that it's, increasingly sort of a business and a game of ego and power, and just how dangerous that is. Anytime we can kind of, use comedy or the arts to kind of shed a light in a greater sense about the absurdity of the situation that we find ourselves in, is always great. I personally am, and it feels like the movie is sort of aligned with this, which is like, I don't think it's really about, blaming anyone or creating, additional divisiveness, or sort of anybody ever saying this is right and this is wrong. I think it's, you're like, this is stupid and this is smart. I think that it's really sort of the joy, in a way, of, great movies, is that we kind of can see things in sometimes new ways that we wouldn't be able to, because we can kind of hit it from left to center and be like, oh, right, this whole system is insane. When Gary, Steve Carell's character, sort of sees this very substantive kind of war hero speaking to his own sort of democratic beliefs, he kind of decides to come to town and sort of run a campaign to try to get him elected and kind of flip this otherwise red state blue. And, he's promptly followed by Rose Byrne's character, who comes in and she says, like, no, we're going to keep it red. And it really ends up sort of comedically highlighting the absurdity, the surreal way in which sort of we've begun to run elections. It's always a good day at work if you're getting to kind of, be thrown zingers from Jon Stewart to deliver to Steve Carell. That always is like a nice day at work. You feel like, wow, how lucky am I to have landed here with such heavyweights. And, there's a lot of funny people. And it's fun to, be a part of that team. Boy, did I feel like a dummy when I sort of assumed the whole thing was a backlot. I think they just so happened to really find like the perfect kind of, isolated piece of town that really kind of looks exactly like the script. I mean, the opening and reading the first few pages, and, Bob Seger comes in singing Against the Wind, and right away you kind of like really picture what the town looks like, and then landing here from New York and seeing it, I was like, holy, they really brought this script to life. But I think a lot of it also was pre-existing, and a lot of it is fully built. So I think they really did a great job. Jon is really loved by his crew and the actors. I think that since he, has been one himself, he sort of has a real sense of that, moments are like each small moment is very important, and also kind of what he doesn't need. It's almost like you can really see him in real time building the edit in his mind. And it seems like he's very conscientious of almost like, okay, everybody, those people can go home, and now we're going to be over here. And so I think everybody really always appreciates somebody that has kind of is holding the big picture in their head in that way. He has this sort of seemingly limitless supply of political zingers and directions to take things in. So it's very exciting in that it feels so all-purpose that you're with one of the funniest people of all time, and also one of the most brilliant. And, as particular to things that are in the realm of sort of politics and backdoor dealing, something that, frankly, is not really my deepest interest level, is it's incredible to have that kind of resource to lean on.
I was thinking about how do you satirize the current moment without necessarily being so specific? How do you think about it? Sort of in the difference of how do you think about the weather versus how do you think about the climate? So I was trying to figure out, was there something about the climate of our current political system, the larger systems at play, and how those systems are incentivized that create the kinds of outcomes that we're finding, the sort of more corrupted outcomes. So rather than sort of focusing on, a Trump-like figure or a political figure that's taken off, you try and think about it from a systems perspective. It really is about the current system of where is the money? How is the money incentivized, whether it be for the media or for the political parties? What is it that's corrupting and polluting the kinds of discourse and outcomes and policies that might arise from that? And where does that money go, and how is it used for its own influence, and how does the system protect itself? I would just like it if people walked away from it thinking about the system as a whole and the outcomes that we get when we allow the entire system to become sort of self-propagating, and that the financial incentives are for very negative outcomes. it's like Titans battling on the mortal coil. You know what I mean? Like the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, this is just a small town, and they bring in their the entire weight of those two political machines, and they sort of, it's Batman versus Superman. It's these two titans battling on, and it's that sense of like, you're destroying all these buildings around here, right? But they're locked in their battle. And when their battle is over, they move on, and everyone else has to sort of rebuild whatever it was that they plowed over during their fight, and they kind of just moved to the next town. Steve was really the only, I really did write this for him and with him in mind. And so I'm very glad that he wanted to do it. Because it's a difficult character, because it's, what do you do with someone that who might believe in what they're doing ideologically, who might be very principled, but they live in a world that is less principled, and what does that do to them? He's one of the few people that I've ever met who could play all those different notes, from the comedy to the more serious parts, but also you still, there's a certain sadness to his life. Like, his life is about trying to get money for these things that he believes in, and he pays a big price for that as well. That character is just all about integrity. And that's the way I always viewed Chris. He's just one of those guys that he does great work, and then he goes and he lives where he wants to live, and he doesn't play the game. And he's had a background in Texas and in farming, and he just, I wanted somebody that had a little bit of this in their being, in their DNA. And I felt like he was a great person to have that, forgetting about all the, just as a great actor, but he was able to bring a firmness to it. Rose is it's funny. She came in, we'd all been working for about 2 weeks when she was able to come in. And the first scene was her kind of marching back and forth in front of the camera, trying to make sure that she got the analytics people that Gary was going to get, and she wanted to make sure. And she goes, "Look, man, if he wants to take a stand in Turdsville, USA, then I say let's bury him here." She realizes that all the people from the town are in the office at the time, and she just turns. And I was like, if you could just turn and like maybe hit the mark at that moment, because we only had one camera on her, and just dead on, just go, "Not a turd, heart and soul of America." Keep walking, but like she just nails it like each time, and then added her own flourishes and all those things. I was like, oh, I'm dealing with an all-star. That's what's great about having people like Topher and Natasha in there, is when you write something, you write it in a vacuum. And a lot of times it's really not written for performance. It's written for what's in your head. So when it comes alive with the actors, you're like, oh, you're going to do a lot of that writing with just your face. I should probably take some of this writing out. So I can remove things that are extraneous or redundant, and then they fill it in with great dynamics between the characters. So they create much fuller and layered comedy and scene work than I could have created just in what I'd written. I really love this process. Having come from sort of topical and daily television, which was really fun and challenging in its own way, but forgiving in the sense that, okay, Monday's show kind of sucked, but Tuesday will be fine, or Wednesday, and it just keeps going. And in some ways, this is a more emotional process, because you work on something for such a long time before it's realized. And then as it's being realized, you bring in people like Grace Yoon and Alex Bovard and Bobby Bukowski, and they elevate what you had written through production design and costume and cinematography. And watching that happen after spending so much time with it just kind of alone is a really, it's emotional. It's kind of invigorating, like all this time, and you just have these 30 days to get it all done. And watching everybody come together, and the actors and the set and all those things, elevating it is, yeah, it's very exciting. I took great care in running this by a lot of people that are in that world to make sure that it met the test of believability. That in the realm of possibility in our current environment and political system, is this realistic in the sense of the motivations of the consultants that come in and in the machinations that take place within it and the types of financial commitments and other things that can occur. And so I tried to very much calibrate it to those realities so that if you step back from it and think about what its intentions are, that those are realistic. And so that was the starting point, is that this had to be realistic, that this could occur. And, you know, none of them, if anything, they just got sad as they would read it and just go, yeah, that could happen. You know, there was never any like, no way, that's nuts. That would never happen. It was more like, yeah, I could see that. That's when I knew that I was finding the right range. There is a concerted effort to make it that there is a right and a left, and it's the only way to view it. And that viewing it from the perspective of integrity versus corruption might be a more accurate frame to look at it, but it's a more difficult frame for them to sell. Red blue is a lot easier to sell than, yeah, that's an interesting point, but that might not be. And watching the conversation, look, there's a whole industry that exists to take issues and make them indecipherable to the average person, to just use language to manipulate whichever you want without getting the real facts of it out to people. And unless we have a guardian that is as tenacious as those that are seeking power, we're going to continue to find ourselves in these kinds of situations.
My initial conversations with Jon were very exciting. I mean, he's obviously such a prolific figure in comedy and in politics. So to read this brilliant screenplay, such a smart satire, I immediately was intrigued, and we had a very long conversation about faith, my character, not religion, and America and politics as it stands right now, and his insight is just sort of unparalleled. One of the strongest things about the script was that no one's safe. Everyone's being made fun of, and Democrats, Republicans, feminists, anti-feminists. It's poking fun in a really important way, in a really healthy way, to just sort of break down why the system has broken down. I think because of the current administration, there's more interest in politics than ever before, and that's a good thing. There's more discussion about it, and particularly about money in politics and how that has to change. I play Faith Brewster. She's a Republican high-powered strategist, so she's hired by the party to come in and consult on very specific campaigns and ideas, and she's so fun to play. It's so fun sparring with Steve. I mean, he's so quick, he's so generous, and nothing can surprise him or shock him, so it's a delight to try to get a reaction. And he has a great rapport with Jon, and it's been really, truly so fun to be able to have scenes with him. It's such a great cast, and it's a testament to Jon, and his reputation and the screenplay, and Plan B, who are producing. Natasha, Lyonne, who I'm obsessed with, is playing Tina, who's a very sophisticated political, analytics, who like Cambridge Analytica, one of those companies. She sort of works. She's one of the new guard of politics and analyzing things. Topher Grace is brilliant as a pollster who's working for the Democratic side. Steve, obviously. Chris Cooper, who's one of my all-time favorite actors, is playing Jack Hastings, who's the nominee to try to topple the incumbent. Mackenzie Davis is also in it, and she's kind of she's the heart and soul of the movie. I feel like she's kind of playing Jon Stewart. She's like the moral conscious. It's like studying a microcosm of the bigger political landscape in this little small town. It's just diluted down to a small town, but it's really what is happening all over the world, in every country, in all parts of politics. That it's never about the message anymore. It's just about the winning. Gary and Faith do have this incredible rivalry, and it's very fun and very punchy and like kind of a delightful. And Faith is really sort of like the Terminator in a way. They're like the two heads of the superhero parties coming together to fight their cause. And it's absolutely more about them and their ego than the actual party or its policies or the people of the town. And it's a great distilled examination of the bigger game at play. It perfectly hones in on that of sort of people coming in from the outside, hijacking the situation, leaving the town or the people who are actually vulnerable in need behind. And you see that through the sequence of events of how it unfolds and who gets treated badly and how they talk to them, and the incredible strategy of the strategy behind what they're doing. So it shines a light on it in a way with humor, which is like so hard to do, but so important.
This is an easy movie to sign on to. I mean, I don't know if I was the biggest fan of The Daily Show, but I challenge anyone to say they watched more episodes or loved it more than I did. And especially when Steve was on it. And then to know these guys are teaming up together. Individually, I'd want to work with either of them separately. And the fact that they were doing it together was like my chance to be a correspondent, like, you know, like one of those young correspondents on The Daily Show. Steve is like, I mean, everyone knows he's a great actor. But I think what people don't know is how much of his stuff is improv, because they assume, because it's so good, they assume it's just scripted. It's like, I don't know, running a race with a natural triathlete. He's just a improv triathlete, and just trying to keep up with him. I improvised something once, and Steve took it so much further than I was ready to go with it, and it was my idea. He's a genius. This is something that looks at a broken system and a guy who's trying to do something within it and is critical of all elements of that system, even the guy. So I just thought this is like, Dr. Strangelove or something, these movies that I grew up loving where they're critical of everyone in a way that makes you laugh. The script, when I read it, had my attention all the way through it, but the end really blew me away. And Jon's just an amazing writer. Then when I got on set, he's an amazing director. And look, all actors have been in films that don't have a lot to say. This film has so much to say, and it says it so seductively because it's funny. Something I admired about the town Jon chose is that a lot of movies that want to make statements about America are actually kind of making it about a fictional America that doesn't really exist. It's kind of an idea of America that exists in our head. And when I arrived on set and I saw what Jon had put in the script, but then what he'd kind of put into practice here is it's actual America. It's a heightened story about our political system, but it takes place in real America. We're not on a backlot. We're really here. Kurt is a really cynical guy. He's an analyst, so he's all about the numbers, and he looks up to Gary as kind of a father figure, and part of Gary is very much about the numbers, but he's kind of a loyal subject of Gary's, and he's probably been with him for a while and really admires him. Very easy to play that opposite Steve Carell, because I sit in these scenes and I kind of have the same relationship with him that I'm sure Kurt has with Gary, which is I just, want to become him. He's so good. This cast is extraordinary. Being part of a ensemble like this, you go, I mean, it takes the pressure off of you, because at any moment you can pass the ball to someone else and they're going to score. It's just like being part of a great team. Rose Byrne is someone I've never worked with. I know a little bit and I've really admired, and she's hilarious. Chris Cooper is, one of the greatest actors of our time, and I get to ride to work with him in the morning. Natasha Lyonne is, I think I have the most stuff opposite her. I'm a huge admirer of hers.